Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at today's international edition of the Hindu newspaper, the important articles and their analysis from the portion of prelims as well as the mains perspective, and also go about the nuances of answer writing and how to improve your answer writing skills. Now today in total we are going to have a discussion around 8 different topics. Now the first 3 we are going to discuss in slightly greater detail, relevant for your examination in the mains but also in prelims as well. So the first article is South states seek a freeze on Lok Sabha seats for 25 years. This is a continuing story with the aspect of delimitation, which has remained in news for a few weeks now. So this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then, why is uploading voters' data a challenge? Now, this follows a large amount of uproar across the country in terms of, and as well as in terms of the parliament and the parliamentary proceedings that we are observing, where the opposition parties are alleging a kind of a mismanagement in terms of the electoral data rolls. So what is that Form 17C? Which basically Election Commission had refrained from publishing, and why is it that it is important to maintain transparency thereby? So this is also going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Then underfunding of nutrient subsidy schemes. So the Fertilizer Committee has pulled up the ministry for underfunding the nutrient subsidy scheme. So what is that nutrient subsidy scheme and why is it important to increase the amount of funds in that nutrient subsidy scheme? So this is relevant for your GS paper 3, that is the portion of agriculture. Now, few of the articles we are going to refer for the portion of your prelims, that is the SAARC nations. Now, this follows basically the External Affairs Minister's clarification in front of the members of parliament, where he talked about the fact that the SAARC is at a pause and is not completely suspended. So what are the SAARC nations, the countries involved? So that is something we'll take a look into. A new stealth frigate has been launched. And what is that stealth frigate? And what is that deal with Russia? Indo-France naval drill off the coast of Goa is being held. PLI scheme is something we are going to talk about briefly. And GI tag Jaggery has been exported for the first time from the western part of Uttar Pradesh. So which region has got that GI tag? So these are the topics which become important for your prelims examination as well. Okay, now without further ado, let us initiate the discussion with the first topic of the day, that is South states seek freeze on Lok Sabha seat count for 25 years. Now, there has been an on-raging, a kind of a debate, a kind of a discussion amongst the various different political players of the country owing to the possible delimitation exercise which could be carried out in 2026. Now, what is delimitation? Why is it that this delimitation is carried out? What is the Delimitation Commission? And also, why is it that many of the states are feeling particularly concerned with this exercise? What are the issues at hand? And what can be the possible way forward? These are few of the things that we need to consider in this particular article for the examination. We are not going to consider the political to and fro and the tug of war which has been going on, and we are not going to concentrate upon any statement made by any of the political party. So first of all, starting with the delimitation. What is this delimitation? So when we talk about delimitation, it is basically the process of fixing or redrawing the number of seats and the boundaries of the territorial constituencies, both for the Lok Sabha as well as for the legislative assemblies. So for example, let's suppose you have a particular state. Let's suppose I have 7 to 8 different constituencies in the state, right? Now, over a period of time, the population of this state is going to increase. But is it the case that population of any region will increase uniformly? That population of A will increase by the same number as population of B, C, and D? Absolutely not. The population growth is going to be non-uniform, as has been the case across the world and as has been the case throughout the history of humanity as well. Now, over a period of time, let's suppose over a period of 20 years, 10 years or so on, as the population increases, then that means member of one particular constituency will have a burden of greater population as compared to maybe a member of another constituency, isn't it? Now, adhering to the basic principle that every member of parliament should end up representing more or less the same amount of population, that is where this delimitation exercise is carried out periodically, where these boundary lines are basically redrawn. So that overall, the population to MP ratio, that remains the same. So that is the reason or the purpose behind this delimitation exercise. Now, this is not something which is unique only to India. This delimitation exercise is carried across the globe. And there are varying practices followed across the globe. In certain areas, this is done annually. In certain areas, this is done prior to every election. But you have this delimitation which is done in order to ensure that in any particular democracy, the vote, what it represents, that representation tends to remain the same. Now, the exercise is performed by the Delimitation Commission that is set up by an Act of Parliament. Article 82 deals with the delimitation in the Act of Parliament. So when we talk about the Delimitation Commission, it is provided under the provisions of Article 82, right? And here it enacts the Delimitation Act after every census. Now, I hope we are aware that census or the population count exercise is carried out every 10 years and has been carried out every 10 years. Right? 1921, 31, 41, like that every 10 years till 2011. Now, the census exercise which was supposed to be carried out in 2021, that has been slightly delayed. And rather than saying slightly delayed, we can use the term significantly delayed, because owing to the COVID pandemic, there was a delay in the census exercise, and it is understandable. There will be logistical issues. Carrying out a census exercise is not something that you can carry out sitting behind a laptop or a system. That is where you have to deploy hundreds and thousands of individual workers on the ground level to enumerate the population data and the details of that. So due to the COVID pandemic, it was delayed, but now we are in the year of 2025 and still census exercise has not been carried out. Now, after the census exercise, delimitation exercises are carried out. Now, after coming into force commencement of the Act, the central government constitutes a delimitation commission. Right? Now, the Delimitation Commission demarcates the boundaries of the parliamentary constituency as per the provisions of the Delimitation Act. Now, in our country previously also, multiple delimitation exercises have happened. It is not as if it is basically happening for the first time. So, such delimitation exercises have happened 4 times previously. So, in 1952, under the Delimitation Commission Act 1952, then 1963, following the census of 1961, then 1973, following the census of 1971, right? And then 2002, under the Delimitation Act 2002. Now, this is slightly different. We are going to talk about it. Now, what becomes important for your prelims are these particular provisions. This becomes very vital for your prelims examination. So, Delimitation Commission is a high-powered body whose orders have the force of law and cannot be questioned before a court of law, right? Now, these orders, they come into the force since the commencement of the Act, as is mentioned by the President of India. Now, having said that, the copies of the orders passed by the Delimitation Commission, they are placed before the Parliament and the legislative assemblies as well. However, modifications are not permissible within those orders. So it is placed before the Parliament, it is placed before the state legislature, but modification is not to be allowed. So that is the constitutional provision associated with delimitation. Now, having said that, when we talk about 2002 or the previous delimitation exercises, you see, in the previous delimitation exercise, that is in 2002, there was again a lot of reservation which was expressed by southern states. We will talk about the reservations that are present in many of the states, not only the southern states, but in other states as well, regarding the delimitation, because delimitation is done on the basis of population, so that the MP to population ratio remains the same. Now, automatically, when we talk about the population growth across the country is not same. We have regions, let's suppose in the area of UP or rather in Odisha, certain sections in Odisha, in certain sections of Bihar, where the total fertility rate is a whopping more than around 3%. Total fertility rate, the number of offsprings on an average that a reproducing mother has in her reproducing cycle or that phase. So it is more than 3%. That means on an average, every individual is reproducing 3 kids. Whereas when you talk about the total fertility rate, let's suppose of the states like Kerala, right, that is around roughly 1 to 2%. Now, mind you, this 1 to 2% basically is less than the replacement rate of population. What do we understand by replacement rate of population? Replacement rate is basically, UPSC had asked this question in the prelims as well. Replacement rate is the fertility rate which is required in order to simply replicate the population. Neither the population is going to increase nor the population is going to decrease. Basically, the population is going to remain consistent. So replacement rate is attained when total fertility rate is equal to 2.1 on an average. So that is considered to be the replacement fertility rate. Now, states like Kerala have a fertility rate which is lower than the replacement rate. That means in the coming years, they are going to represent or exhibit a kind of a decline in population trends. Now, obviously, if you carry out delimitation exercise under such parameters, what you come across is the fact that many of the states will experience that the number of seats that they have, the number of constituencies that they have, that starts to reduce. Now, that is a major area of concern, isn't it? Now, in India, anyways, when we talk about an individual MP ends up having a very large population burden as compared to, let's suppose, a UK or a US, right? So individual MPs, they end up catering to roughly around more than 7 lakh population on an average, right? There are MPs having more as well. Whereas in UK, it is roughly around 1.2 lakhs. So think about it, there is almost a 5 to 6 times more burden on an individual MP. Now, burden on an individual MP, is that just a number that we are talking about? No. Why do we elect an MP? Why do we have a member of parliament? So that that member of parliament can represent our interests, right? Our needs, our demands in the political system of the country and ensure that we are a part of the growing tide as the nation grows. Now, if a member of parliament has got to cater to a very large population, that in itself defeats the purpose of that representative electoral democracy. Now, in 2002, owing to the pressures and owing to the realities which were present, now at that point of time, the delimitation exercise was carried out. Territorial boundaries of the constituency were redrawn, but not based on the 2001 census, but rather the 1971 census, whereby the redrawing of the boundaries was done owing to the fact that each MP should roughly represent an equal amount of population. That is why the redrawing of the boundaries had been done, right? Without altering the or without taking into account the population change. So that was done in 2002. Now, by the Amendment Act, thereby, this particular delimitation exercise was then postponed up till 2026. Now, 2026 is upon us. census exercise for the year or for the decade has not been carried out. And hence there is an increased amount of pessimism that this is a kind of a political move whereby a census exercise might be carried out after 2026 immediately, and a delimitation of the boundary can be done, altering the parameters for 2029 general elections. Because what does the Delimitation Act tell us, or the amendment which was done in 2002, what does it tell us? It tells us that delimitation will be carried out or a delimitation commission will be set out in 2026, and the parameters for delimitation shall be following the next census immediately after 2026. Now, you never know when the next census is going to be carried out. Now, here you take a look at the chart representing the change in population per MP ratio over the years. Now think about it, that when you talk about, let's suppose, the states like West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, etc., right? In these cases, the number of people or the amount of population per MP has been increasing, leading to an increased burden. But if delimitation is carried out purely on the basis of population, is that going to be fair? Even though it is constitutional, just because something is constitutional does not always mean that it is going to be fair. Why do I say so? So here, if let's suppose delimitation is carried out based upon the present population dynamics, and mind you, after a couple of years, whenever that census exercise is going to be carried out, 2 years, 3 years, whenever down the line, this would have indicated the changed dynamics as per the increased fertility rate in northern India as compared to reduced fertility rate in southern part of the country. Now observe the changes. Now there are two such projections in front of your screen. One projection in the first table, if let's suppose the total number of seats in the Lok Sabha, they are kept at a consistent number of 543. And then the constituencies are redrawn based upon the change in the dynamics of population to keep the MP to population ratio same. In that case, observe states like UP and Bihar will end up gaining around 10 and 11 seats per state. Whereas, take a look at the state of Tamil Nadu. It can end up losing 8 seats. Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, a further loss of 8 seats. Kerala, Karnataka, a further loss of 10 seats. Punjab, Himachal and Uttarakhand, a further loss of 3 seats. So this is when, if we follow the 2002 model, let's suppose that the territorial boundaries are redrawn based upon the new population. However, it is not exactly the 2002 model, because in 2002, we affixed that population to 1971 census itself. Right? So there was not major change in 2002 model. But however, if let's suppose the normal delimitation exercise is carried out where the number of seats in Lok Sabha also is increased, then in that case, all the states will have a gain in the number of seats. So, but then, is that going to be proportional? No. Uttar Pradesh will have a net gain of whopping 63 seats on its own. Bihar, a net gain of 39 seats. Rajasthan, 25. Madhya Pradesh, 23. So if you take a look at all of these together, you are staring at an increased seat count by around 160 seats just in these 4 northern states. 160 seats. It is not a small number that we are talking about. But when you take a look at the southern states, they will also experience an increase in the number of seats, but 10 seats in Tamil Nadu. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, 12 seats. Karnataka, maybe 13 seats. Kerala, no change, no increase in the number of seats. Himachal Pradesh, no increase in the number of seats. So, even in this method, many of the states will lose out in terms of the representation that they have in the parliamentary system. So think about it. Either of the scenarios that you put forward, wherever you consider the recent population numbers and then you carry out the delimitation exercise, there is a loss which is associated. And that loss is something which can always be brushed under the carpet, that no, all the states are equal in front of the parliament, etc., etc. But you have to understand, political representation is a key to expression of the political aspiration and the aspiration of the larger public. Alienating the political aspiration of a particular region will be absolutely against the spirit of the constitution and the electoral democracy that we have. And owing to that, there is a kind of pessimism, at the same time skepticism, expressed by the political parties about what the future holds. Now here, let us understand in a summarized manner what are the issues that the political players, that the political parties and the political activists, they have been raising for the past 4 to 5 months. First of all, anti-reforms. Now you see, why do they say anti-reforms? Because when we talk about the southern states, they appear to lose out. Why? Because their population has not increased. But why has the population not increased? Because these southern states, they are amongst the most successful across the country in terms of implementation of the healthcare schemes, in terms of implementation of nutritional schemes. Right. As a consequence, the demographic growth in that region has been very different. As a consequence, the total fertility rate has been controlled. And this is owing to the success of the schemes by the state government, some of the schemes by the central government as well, and better administrative efficiency. After all, almost all the states have some or the other schemes for healthcare. But the efficient administration is the one which ensures the ground level penetration of the scheme and the benefit to the larger masses. Now, in the case, when we say that the southern states have successfully over the decades managed to ensure that the schemes end up benefiting the larger population, the end result, can that be justified in terms of reducing the number of seats that they have in parliament? Wouldn't that signify a kind of an anti-reformist stance? So that is why this is seen to be an anti-reformist stance if it is followed. Secondly, the basis of delimitation. Now, there have been various different arguments which have been put forward, some of them again bordering the line of danger, in terms of when we talk about only population as the basis of delimitation. If you carry it out today, if you carry it out tomorrow, if you carry it out after a decade, if you carry it out after, let's suppose, 50 years, or if you would have carried it out maybe 150 years going back into the past. The reality of the Indian subcontinent is that the northern states have always been more populated. There are geographical realities and the geographical aspects associated with that. The plain region always will have a greater population density, which we observe in the northern part of the country as compared to the peninsular India. Now you have factors like climate, topography, agricultural productivity, drainage systems. There are multiple different factors involved. We will not go into that. But the reality of the matter is that the population in the northern Indian states are going to be higher. Having said that, there have been certain recommendations that let us not keep population only as the key criteria for delimitation. Let us include financial contribution at hand. Which state contribute how much in terms of finances, and accordingly the constituencies should have a delimitation. Now that is what we can refer to as borderline danger. Why? Because think about it, greater the financial contribution means greater is your political representation. Lesser the financial contribution, lesser is your political representation. Now that will give rise to a substantial disparity amongst the states, and that is never good for national growth in the long run. And it takes us back to the old times when universal adult franchise was considered to be a kind of a wasteful goal, where the ideals of the political representation would be that, okay, not everybody should have the equal right in terms of voting. Those who are financially well off, those who are well educated, only they should be allowed to cast vote. That is what the Britishers followed. That is what the Americans followed in the centuries gone by. We have come across and over that age, and India has been very clear since independence that we are going to follow a universal adult franchise. Every vote will have an equal representation, right? So the basis of delimitation only on the aspect of population is problematic, but the other solutions which are being offered by the political players, that is also equally problematic. The political representation and the aspiration, that gets muzzled. After all, the basic purpose of having an MP gets defeated if, let's suppose, the MP is overburdened with the population size, or for that matter, if, let's suppose, you have carried out the reforms and now you have lesser MPs in a particular state. So what is it that we can do going ahead? What is the way forward? Because you would have been hearing this bickering political debate, which is very, very volatile and in a way very, very divisive as well. But as candidates of civil services, you have to think about it, that if you would have been the administrator, what would have been the possible future course of action? What could be the possible way forward? Now here, one of the possible way forward is capping the number of seats in Lok Sabha. Whatever might be the periodic increase in population, cap the number of seats in Lok Sabha for, let's suppose, another 25 years, right? So that the other less developed states, they also are given more opportunity to grow. The developed states will grow more, and there can be such social reforms and such health sector reforms which can be carried out, and overall India's total fertility rate is controlled, population growth is controlled. This is one of the solutions. This is the solution, after all, which is being demanded by majority of the parties, that whatever is the total number of seats, cap it to around 543 itself. What is wrong in the number of seats that we have? Let us go ahead with that. Now, this is one of the most amicable and implementable solutions. Other than that, redrawing the boundaries without altering the states, or without altering rather the number of seats, in order to ensure that the population to MP ratio is same, right? So here, in this case, you redraw the boundaries in order to ensure that the population to MP, right, that ratio remains the same. Then, increasing the representation in Rajya Sabha. Now, that is another point which is largely ignored. When we talk about the parliament, Parliament does not involve only the Lok Sabha. Parliament is also constituted of the Rajya Sabha. In many of the cases, Rajya Sabha has got a substantial amount of powers, which sometimes the Lok Sabha also doesn't enjoy. So, when we talk about Rajya Sabha, now, Rajya Sabha does not have equal representation from various states, isn't it? So, why not we should also adopt a kind of a system where, regardless of the state, be it a populous state like Uttar Pradesh or be it a less populous state like Goa, why shouldn't all of them have an equal say in the Council of States, that is the Rajya Sabha? The model that is followed in the US electoral system, right, in the US democracy, where basically all the various different states have an equal proportion. So that can also end up happening. This can also have an impact. Then this also brings us to the argument that isn't it more justifiable for administrative efficiency to carve out smaller states? For administrative efficiency, for better utilization of funds, and for better entrenched and decentralized development. Now, there has been argument, counter-argument regarding smaller states, larger states, etc. But the reality of the matter is that when we take a look at certain states like Uttar Pradesh, that in itself can form a country which can be amongst the top 10 most populous country across the globe. Think about it. Now, nowhere is it said that smaller states are going to be bad or it is going to be good, but going ahead into the future, for better and more concentrated development, this is an aspect which can also be looked into. Now, another way forward which can be postulated, which is being forwarded by many of the political analysts as well, is the fact that when we talk about development, Development, yes, member of parliament is responsible for the development. But the reality of the matter is also that the number of or the population in the states has been increasing, and larger section of the population is getting that feeling that our interests are not being represented. Whatever are my demands are being ignored, maybe for a wealthier class or maybe for other section of the society. Now we need development at the grassroots. That is the end goal. So why can't we have a system where greater power is given to the state governments? And let's suppose we redraw the seats or the constituencies of the legislative assembly. In many of the states, the number of seats for the legislative assemblies have been unchanged for decades now, despite the fact that the population has almost quadrupled. Right. So that is where we can redraw and increase the number of seats in the state legislature, increasing the power given to the state government at the same time. And that will ensure holistic development. In that way, the grievances of the population is what we have to cater to. That can be significantly addressed. Here, when we talk about limiting the number of seats, the example can be taken from the case of US. In US, the number of seats have remained the same since around early 1900s, despite the fact that the population has almost quadrupled. So any of these measures can be taken in order to diffuse this kind of political escalation and the war of words, which is never healthy in the democratic setup that we are in order to improve that national integrity and that national unity and unison for growth. We need these solutions, any of the solutions, to be implemented. But more importantly than any of the solutions being implemented, there has to be a national consensus. No decision should be taken without a national consensus. Regardless of how small a state, regardless of how large a state, their agreement is required in any future course of action. Only then can we look for an amicable situation and solution. Okay? I hope this is a topic which has been understood in detail. So we have talked about delimitation exercise, the delimitation commission, the article of the constitution, the concerns of the southern states, and also what should be the way forward along with international examples. Right? Now, the question which can be expected from this particular topic. What is delimitation? Discuss the concerns raised by states for the possible delimitation exercise to be carried out in 2026 and the possible way ahead. So here, when you write the answer, you have to begin first of all by discussing the aspect of delimitation. What do we mean by delimitation? So the simple definition I have provided in the PDF, redrawing of political boundaries. So in the intro, provide the delimitation. Okay, the definition of delimitation. Talk about that it is an international norm followed across the globe where periodic delimitation exercise is carried out in order to ensure population to MP ratio. After all, each vote has the same representation. After that, in the body portion, that is where you talk about the previous delimitation. Because it is a 15 marker, it gives you that scope. So the previous delimitation exercises whenever it has been carried out, right? 52, 63, 73, 2002, all that act you mentioned. After that, you talk about that in 2002, the population figure was fixed at 1971 and there was a redrawing of the territorial boundaries. Then talk about the provision for 2026, delimitation commission to be set up in 2026 following the census which is carried out after 2026. This has raised certain concerns amongst the states in terms of if population is followed as a parameter for delimitation. In that case, there are two possibilities. If you fix the number of seats at 543 and reassign the number of seats, southern states end up losing around more than 30 seats. And then if you increase the number of seats in the parliament in order to readjust along with the population, northern states, 4 states in themselves will be gaining up close to around 160 seats, rendering many of the states politically not relevant in terms of having a government in the center. Then talk about the concerns, anti-reform, it appears to be anti-reforms, right? Political aspirations are not expressed. All those you talk about, provide a point and a subparagraph. Then also talk about the way forward. It is not only important to point out the problems, but more important to point out this and suggest the solutions as well. So that is something you should do. And in the conclusion, talk about the need for a national consensus and moving ahead in unison to ensure India heralds a new chapter of growth in the 21st century rather than in political bickering. Okay, with that, you can end the answer and gain good marks. Okay. There was a question from delimitation, yes, about total fertility rate, replacement rate, delimitation. You can always expect a question this year as well as next year, because these have been in news. Okay. Now, before we move on to the next topic, an announcement for all of you. Today, we have the Unacademy Civil Services Championship test, which is representative in terms of your preparation and your analysis of the multiple choice questions. That will give you a practice of how to appear for multiple choice questions, because one of the major reasons for failure in the prelims examination is not the lack of information, but also the lack of concentration and the lack of ability to solve these MCQs. So take up this opportunity and attend this test, take this test, and this test will be held at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. And you have various rewards from IPL box tickets, iPad, Samsung tablets, etc. that you can gain from. Now, after that, coming to the second article, why is uploading voting data a challenge? Now, if you have been following the parliamentary debates for the month and a half, you would have observed that there is a consistent kind of argument which is being made that there is some discrepancy in the electoral data in terms of the voter roll, right? There has been an allegation from the opposition parties that the electoral rolls are being manipulated, and hence the results that we are seeing in the state elections, they are not exactly representative. Now, the basic or the mere allegation in itself, that has got the potential to erode the trust in the electoral process in our country, and a country which is as large and as diverse as us. This kind of erosion of trust in the electoral process can be very, very dangerous. Now, in May 2024, the Supreme Court was hearing the argument by Association for Democratic Reforms. Now, if I give you the background here, first of all, ADR has been alleging, based upon its analysis and studies, that in various different parliamentary constituencies, the number of voters who have casted the, let's suppose, casted the vote, and the total number of votes that we have, this is not matching. Think about it. I will repeat it again. Think about it. Number of people who have casted the vote, total number of votes counted. They should be the same. So this is showing a discrepancy. So ADR had basically approached the Supreme Court, and ADR had sought the publication of the first part of Form 17C. Now, 17C has got two parts. The first part consists of the details of the voter data. Now, ADR had basically requested to the Supreme Court that this part 1 of the first part of the 17C should be published within 48 hours of electoral process happening, right? So, booth-wise voter turnout data, that should be published in the Election Commission website within the first 48 hours of polling. Now, what was the Election Commission's stand? Election Commission immediately turned it down. The Election Commission said basically that this data is something that we publish to the political or the polling agents of the political party who are present at the polling stations. We publish it to them. We are under no obligation to publish it for the larger society. We are under no obligation to publish it in our website. So in a way, Election Commission had shut down the door. Having said that, the new election commissioner has basically, as the article basically argues, that the new election commissioner has indicated a keen ear to hearing about the grievances by the petitioners, including one of the MPs of Trinamool Congress as well as ADR, in terms of hearing the grievances. So that is slightly a positive aspect. But then, what is this 17C and part 1 of 17C? We will take a look at it. But when we talk about the issue at hand, the issue at hand is very simple and straightforward. That is in terms of the votes. Right? That is number of votes. Number of votes is not equal to number of voters who casted the vote. ADR's own data indicates that this number was equal in how many constituencies? Just 5 constituencies. In just 5 constituencies in the 2024 election, this number was same. In most of the constituencies, this number was not same. It should have been same, right? Now that creates a kind of a doubt. Now, what is the discrepancy that we are looking at? The discrepancy that we are looking at is in the tune of few hundreds, right? Maybe a couple of thousands. In certain cases, the amount of discrepancy in certain constituencies is even 35,000. Now, in a larger Lok Sabha election, that is what the data talks about. In the larger Lok Sabha election, this number of a couple of 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000, 2,000, that is not very large, owing to the fact that you have tens of lakhs of voters who are casting the vote. But nonetheless, the slightest of the discrepancy is a thing to worry about, right? So what is this 17C data and what does it include? So basically, it is the account of votes recorded. The total amount of votes which have been cast, that account is maintained in this. And it includes basically identification number of the electoral or the electronic voting machine, right, used in that polling station. Now, by the way, this Form 17C Part 1 is filled by the polling presiding officer in the polling station and handed over to the polling agent of the political parties as well. Right? All the polling agents of the various political parties which are deputed at the polling station. It also includes the total number of electors assigned to that polling booth, the number of votes cast as per the EVM, the number deciding not to record their votes or who were not allowed to vote, and whether there are any mismatches in the number. All of that is included in 17C Part 1. So in a way, Part 1 of 17C, Form 17C, includes the entire detail about the electoral process. But there are concerns which have been raised. What are the concerns? Not every political party will have polling agents. Now you see, Election Commission has said that basically we are not obliged to provide that data to the larger public or issue it on our website. We give it to the political agents or of the political parties. But what if tomorrow, let's suppose a couple of you decide to have a political party, right? You will have limited resources. Now, obviously, you won't have the wherewithal or the capability to deploy those particular polling agents in all the various polling booths. You will be handicapped in terms of resources. So then that means your political party doesn't get that data at all. So in a way, this is exclusionary. That other than the political parties, nobody deserves to know. But aren't we as voters of this electoral democracy, we are also, in a way, should be in the know about what is happening and why there is a discrepancy, if at all? Then this leads to erosion of trust. And that is the worst that can ever happen in the electoral process. you have many of the democracies, many of the countries. For example, take a look at our western neighbor of Pakistan. In the western neighborhood of Pakistan, regardless of whosoever casts the vote or whenever the election takes place, the general opinion of the public is it doesn't matter. Whosoever the establishment wants, they will be in power, regardless of who we have voted or who we have not voted. That in itself leads to a kind of an establishment which doesn't have the trust of the population. So when you don't have the trust, you lack accountability as well. And that is never good for the development. So trust is to be maintained. At the same time, it should be perceived to be maintained. In reality, you might be taking multiple measures for maintenance of trust. But in perception also, you need to be seen taking certain steps to ensure there is transparency. And in the modern day and age, when we have so many political parties and so many political representatives fighting elections, the elections are very closely fought. So the slightest of the margins in the first past the poll system can alter the balance in the larger state or in the larger Lok Sabha. So that is why in a scenario where we are in the era of closely linked fought elections, this discrepancy can alter the political dynamics and more importantly, can in a way dissuade and discourage not only the citizens but also the political workers. And we are talking about lakhs of workers here, right? Now, what is it that the Election Commission is arguing for the discrepancy in data? After all, Election Commission is made up of the bureaucrats, right? The same bureaucrats who are there after clearing the exams that you are appearing for. So think about it. They are not going to be that absurd. So what is it that the Election Commission is arguing? Election Commission is arguing that, look, for an electoral process like the Lok Sabha, we end up deploying tens and thousands and lakhs of poll workers. Now, every poll worker or every particular worker who is assigned a job or a particular role at a polling station, not all of them are erudite or educated to the same extent, not all of them are that tech savvy. So they end up committing errors. Owing to the fact that there is so much amount of pressure on the polling day, they end up committing more mistakes. So that is basically where the ECI has argued that it can be regarded as a human error. And fair enough. Think about it. Who is deputed as a poll worker in the nearby polling station? The normal government employees who are there. Now, it is up for argument whether all the government employees have the same capability or not, but obviously there can be a scope for human error. A slightest of the human error in terms of numerical representation can end up having a cumulative error of few hundreds or thousands of voter names. That is one of the arguments. The other argument is, what Election Commission is basically saying is that, look, if we publish the data almost immediately, that data can always be manipulated and that data can always lead to misinformation campaigns in the new era of social media that can lead to a widespread discomfort. It has cited the term widespread discomfort. Another argument is that, look, most of the elections are held in around 5 phases, 7 phases, 6 phases. Now, whether that is in itself is justified or not is an argument for another day. In the day of modern tech and in the day of advancement, we still have an electoral season or a festival of sorts which spans for almost 1.5 months or 2 months. Right. So that is an argument for other day. But the argument made by Election Commission is that if we start publishing that data and make it public immediately in 48 hours, that can impact the polling in the subsequent phases as well. Now, look, those arguments are justified or not is again not for us to judge. What we need to understand is what should be the way forward. The way forward in this is very simple. Voter trust has to be paramount. Voters should not doubt that if I have casted a vote, or if I have cast a vote rather, whether that has been manipulated or not. So whatever needs to be done in order to ensure that voter trust, ensure that the VVPAT accountability or verifiability is done on a larger scale, right? Now, Election Commission is saying that in many of the cases, the pre-poll exercise testing of the EVM, that data is also counted in, and that is why there's a discrepancy in the final number. So, despite having all the SOPs, despite having the signature of all the polling agents, why is it that we still are having this kind of a testing kind of a fault? That needs to be rectified, isn't it? At a pilot basis, maybe we need to try out some newer measures where we have to ensure that all the measures, standard operating procedures are followed, and then match that number. This should not simply be brushed aside as another argument for another topic of political discussion. This can have a deep-rooted impact in the society at large. So it should be treated with utmost seriousness. Okay? So with that, that is what is required for the topic. Now, let us take a look at the practice question. Discuss the need to ensure transparency in electoral process, citing current issues, and highlight the ways ahead. Now, this is a slightly generic question that has been framed. Okay? Need to ensure transparency in electoral process. So, how do you introduce this answer? In the introduction, you can talk about that in an electoral democracy, the process of election needs to be free and fair, and at the same time perceived to be fair in order to ensure trust and faith maintained in the electoral process and the democratic norms and the strengthening of the democratic norms. That is the brief intro that you can put about, right? Now, in India, the elections have largely been free and fair. That is how you will start the body. Elections have largely been free and fair across multiple decades, barring few of the violent activities which have happened here or there. However, in the recent times, there have been concerns owing to following the electoral results and the electoral processes, and those concerns are, so here, talk about the electoral rules, the data of the electoral rules, talk about the elimination of certain sections of population from the electoral data. Also talk about, because it is talking about current issues. It is not singling out any issue. So what are the current issues? So we have discussed that in the previous CNA as well, that the current issues will include the use of money, mismanagement, right? Large money influence, money power, breeding corruption going ahead. Then talk about, for example, the misinformation campaigns on social media, the hate speeches, all of this you talk about. And then highlight the way ahead. So a political consensus, pilot basis, greater audit of the VVPAT, those are the possible way forward that you can provide. Okay? I hope that is understood. Now, after this, we move on to the next article. Fertilizers Committee warns Ministry against the underfunding of nutrient-based subsidy. Can we write about the appointment of Election Commissioner? In one of the concerns, you can say, rather than writing about the appointment of Election Commissioner, what will be more valuable is talking about the partiality or the perceived partiality of the Election Commission. That will be a much well-rounded argument, and simply appointment of Election Commissioner, that can sound a bit to the extremity, but yes, given how the Election Commissioner is appointed, that can always be made as an argument. Yes. Okay. Now, after this, Fertilizers Committee warns Ministry against underfunding of nutrient-based subsidy schemes. Now, what is that nutrient-based subsidy scheme? When we say nutrients, see, every plant requires macro and micronutrients in order to ensure growth. Now, growth can be in many different ways. Growth can be, let's suppose, in the manner of the increase in vegetation, that is a leaf growth, more amount of fruits. But nonetheless, you do require the basic nutrients, that is NPK. Nitrogen, then you have phosphate and potash, right? Ideally, it is suggested that they should be applied in the ratio 4:2:1. Isn't it? For every unit of potash, you should have 2 units of phosphate and 4 units of nitrogen. Now, majority of the soils across the world, they are poor in nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is provided by a fertilizer, which is basically urea. Now, in the case of urea, what happens? That an MRP is fixed by the government. And accordingly, urea is distributed because urea is the one which is required in maximum proportion. Isn't it? So here, an MRP is fixed by the government, and at that price, it is distributed. But what about P and K? For this, you have the nutrient subsidy scheme. What is that? Let us take a look into it. Now, nutrient-based subsidy scheme under effect for phosphatic and potassic fertilizers has been in effect since 1st of April 2010. Since that point of time, a fixed amount of subsidy decided on an annual or biennial basis is provided on subsidized P and K fertilizers depending on their nutrient content, including diammonium phosphate, right? So any fertilizer, let's suppose I have a bag of fertilizer. Now in that, what is the content of phosphate? What is the content of, let's suppose, potash? Based upon that, I will give the subsidy. Based upon that, the government will provide the subsidy. What this ensures is that the random misuse of the fertilizer is not done. A slightly more judicious use is done. Now hereby, under the scheme, the P and K sector is decontrolled. Fertilizer companies are allowed to fix the MRP at reasonable levels, which is monitored continuously by the government. Fertilizer companies manufacture or import fertilizers as per the market dynamics, and then the subsidy is to be provided. Now, this is to reduce the input cost to the farmers. Now, mind you, ever since the late 1960s and 1970s, we have been trying to ensure self-sufficiency in fertilizer production in our country. After all, that is what marked a kind of grey revolution in our country as well, to ensure fertilizer self-sufficiency. Till now, sadly, we have not been able to ensure a fertilizer self-sufficiency, because when we talk about phosphate or let's suppose potash, now these are not very readily available. Phosphate in particular is something which is not very common across various areas of the globe. So they need to be imported, their supply chain needs to be ensured and made reliable. Now, what are the issues which have been raised by the committee? The committee has first of all raised multiple issues. One is that overall the allocation of funds has been abysmal. The committee, after studying the data, has found out that whatever the agricultural ministry, or rather the ministry, has allocated as the amount of sum for the fertilizer allocation, the finance ministry reduced it by around 7%. So there is a reduction in the amount of funds which have been allocated. That fund has been reduced. Now that is never good. But on top of that, basically, whatever funds have already been allocated, those funds are being underutilized. Those funds are not utilized to that same extent, right? So here, underutilization of funds, that also is in question. Lack of any backward linkages. What do we mean by that? Basically, when we talk about these phosphate, potash-based fertilizer, there is not many, as the committee has observed, there are not many in a way treaties or deals with the other countries in order to ensure a reliable supply chain for the mineral exploration, for the mineral extraction, for the marketing of the minerals. Unless and until you do that, The prices will fluctuate every season to such an extent it will alter the farm cost and bring volatility in the farm sector. So that those backward linkages with the countries which have those minerals, that needs to be done. We have been hearing about deals with South American nations for a significant amount of time now. That needs to be expedited. And we don't have enough production units for nano urea, nano DAP. Now, those production units need to be scaled up. Not only will it cater to providing more jobs, but at the same time cater to agricultural self-sufficiency. Now, you see, the agricultural need is for a greater and a more efficient fertilizer application. Because after all, we are the largest country in the world in terms of population. Our requirement for food is going to increase in the coming years. But at the same time, in many parts of our country, the yield per hectare of the crops has been declining. The yield per hectare for crops like rice is almost half, if not 1/3, as is the case of the best cases across the world. So we are not performing at the par of the world, but we are not even performing at half of what the world is operating at. Now, that is important for increasing the yield per hectare, because understand, the amount of cultivable land in India, that is never going to expand exponentially now, because the land is facing the population pressure. You don't have much land to carry out cultivation in. So that is why in the existing area, yield has to be increased, and for that you need better application of fertilizer, judicious application of fertilizer, nano urea, nano DAP. They used to be, or they need to be applied to fulfill the requirement of food security as well. Then there has been a drain in soil health owing to the fact that in many of the cases, phosphate and potassic fertilizers are not even available. The farmers end up applying urea endlessly. Because urea is available, its price is fixed in the market. Now you see, ideally the proportion should be 4:2:1, isn't it? However, in certain regions of Punjab, the number is 34:8:1. Now, Down to Earth had carried out a detailed study about it. It also found out that in certain regions of Haryana, the application mixture of fertilizer is 27.5:6:1. Now, this obviously leads to nutrient imbalance and, as a consequence, impoverishment of the soil health and further soil degradation. Now, owing to climate change anyways, we are facing a lot of pressure in terms of the crop growth, crop cultivation. So that needs to be sorted out. At least the productivity needs to be sorted out so that the farm income is not impacted. Okay, that is why nano urea, nano DAP, at the same time, the nutrient-based subsidy which is to be provided, that needs to be more efficient, and greater allocation of funds need to be there so as to ensure that the farm income is, or the farm input cost is low. If the input cost is low, the farm income will always be high. Okay. Now, after that, we come to some of the articles for the prelims. So basically, when we talk about the articles, so one of the article is in page 1 itself, and that is SAARC is not off the table, says Jaishankar. Now here, basically, when he was interacting with a group of parliamentarians, he basically apprised them of the entire situation in the neighborhood, from the eastern borders to the western borders, and that is where piercing questions were asked. For example, when you had a question about what is happening in Bangladesh, where the minister basically observed that we were aware of a growing tide against Sheikh Hasina, but obviously India did not have enough leverage to influence her in any such way. In that particular interaction, he also made a statement and observation about the SAARC nations. What is important for your examination is not what Jaishankar said, but what is SAARC. Now, SAARC basically is a group of 8 member nations of South Asia. Now, it was established in 1985 as an intergovernmental organization. The purpose: to enhance regions' people's welfare and quality of life by accelerating economic growth, fostering social and cultural progress. guided by principles of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and mutual benefit, and also focus on labor migration, combating human trafficking, and initiatives of SDG. Now, which are the countries of SAARC? That is something you should be aware of. So, the countries of South Asia overall: India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Maldives, Bhutan, and Nepal. So these are the countries of the SAARC nation. Okay, that is important for your prelims. Now, Tavasya, the 4th Krivak class stealth frigate, launched into water. Now, Krivak class stealth frigates, these are basically produced as a result of a $1 billion deal which was made by Russia many years back in order to produce the stealth frigates. Two of these stealth frigates were to be bought off the shelf after being produced in Russia itself, and 2 of them to be manufactured in India following the transfer of technology. Now, what are frigates, by the way? Frigates are those navy ships, in simplest of the terms, which in a way are in the category slightly lower than destroyers. You have the Vishakhapatnam class, Kolkata class destroyers, so they are slightly smaller than destroyers, right? And in the same range around corvettes. So this is a kind of a medium-sized ships which are there for enhanced surveillance and a very swift action at the same time, stealthily sneaking into an enemy monitored area and launching quick attacks, and thereby after that the destroyers and then the aircraft carriers and the submarines take over. Generally, the frigates are a part of the larger groups, the carrier groups that you have. With every aircraft carrier, you have at least 4 to 5 frigates, 2 to 3 destroyers, a couple of corvettes, and a few submarines as well. So that moves entirely as what is referred to as a CBG, or a carrier battle group. Now, these frigates, they are stealth frigates which have been in the making for some time. Now, 2 of them basically have already been in action. So one of them is INS Tushil. INS Tushil, which was manufactured in Russia, that was commissioned in December 9, 2024. The second frigate, INS Tamal, so you had Tushil, then you had Tamal. Tamal is going to be commissioned in June, right? Both of these are in Russia, made in Russia, right? And 2 of them, that is, one is Triput and the 4th is Tavasya. These are made in Goa Shipyard Limited. All of these 4, they are a part of the Krivak class. Okay. So you can have a question about which of these belong to the Krivak class. Like that, you can have a simple question. Okay. Now, Indo-France naval exercise off the Goa coast focuses on anti-submarine warfare. Now you see, India and France, the naval activities have been, or a naval exercise is being carried out off the coast of Goa, where you have the 2 aircraft carriers, that is INS Vikramaditya from Indian side and the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle from the French naval side. Charles de Gaulle is the largest aircraft carrier that France has, and amongst the most potent aircraft carriers operated in the region of Western Europe. Now, Charles de Gaulle and Vikramaditya have been deployed, and there is an anti-submarine warfare owing to aggressive posturing by the Chinese Navy. Now, from here you have to understand that India and France, they have been carrying out military exercises for a long time now, right? You have the exercise that is Varuna. Varuna is between the navies of India and France. Navies of India and France. That is important for your prelims. This is not a part of the Varuna exercise, by the way. And then you have Garuda. This is Air Force. Air Forces of India and France. And then you have Shakti in terms of armies of India and France. Right? So this becomes relevant for your exam. Okay? Now, after this, moving on to the next article, PLI schemes drew investments worth 1.61 lakh crores. That is the government data now. Basically, PLI scheme is or has been a scheme which was conceptualized to increase the production in the manufacturing sector in our country. Now, the government has basically argued that ever since the PLI scheme has been brought into the place, the export basket has changed. Earlier, the export basket would largely be composed of commodities and consumer-based products to now high-end and high engineering-based products as well. Now, PLI scheme in itself was launched in 2021. What is the production linked incentive? The amount that you produce, based upon that, you get the incentive. So that is something which is catered to substantially and exponentially increasing the production. Now, there are various different sectors which are included in the PLI scheme: telecommunication, white goods, textiles, medical devices, automobiles, specialty steels, like the steels which are used for, let's suppose, the frigates that we talked about, the destroyers that we talked about, they require a specialized kind of steel, food products, right? High efficiency solar PV modules, advanced chemistry cell batteries, all of them, they are included under the PLI, where the incentive is given to the by the government to these industries. Now, many of these activities or many of these production processes, they are carried out over a duration of roughly around 2 to 3 years, where the incentive claim is made after the first year of production as well. And that is what the government has argued is responsible for slight lag in data. Having said that, what is important for your examination? What is that PLI scheme? Which are the sectors which are covered under the PLI scheme? Okay. Now, projects are implemented over a period of time ranging from 2 to 3 years, depending upon the nature of manufacturing, and claims are usually made after first year of production. Then coming to the last article, where basically for the first time, a GI tagged Jaggery from UP has been exported. Now, this is the GI tagging which is done to the Muzaffarnagar Jaggery. Right? This is a region of Western UP which is traditionally sugar producing, or rather sugarcane producing region of Western UP. So the gore or the Jaggery of that particular region has received GI tag. So that is important facet and an important trivia for your prelims as well. Okay, now it is being exported. It is being exported not only to Bangladesh, but also export potentials are there for other countries as well. Okay. Now, after this, we basically come to the end of the discussion. I hope the discussion has turned out to be comprehensive, analytical, and at the same time content enriching, as is the requirement for the examination. If you have liked the session, please click on the like, share, and the subscribe button and put your feedback in the comment section below. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.